The following program, The Russ Belville Show, is intended for responsible adults only. We advocate to the repeal of marijuana prohibition for adults. We discuss the science, culture, and controversy about America's marijuana laws. We do not advocate any illegal activity and encourage all listeners to learn their state and federal marijuana laws. Opinions and claims made by guests and advertisers on The Russ Belville Show are their own, and The Russ Belville Show cannot be held legally responsible for their validity or reliability. Viewer discretion is advised.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
From the promise of legalization.
And I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws.
To the agony of prohibition.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Yeah, I hear you had a question for me.
Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes, and welcome to the show. It is Monday, April 7th, 2014, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. So glad you could join us here at Rolla J Studios in beautiful Potland, Oregon, where it is gorgeous outside. It's like sunny and 70, 72 degrees out there, and it's going to be that way for the rest of the week. What a great week for us to get ready for our road trip to 420 in Denver, Colorado. We'll be leaving next Wednesday morning, heading down through Boise, Idaho, across Wyoming, and down into Colorado for what's going to be the biggest 420 event ever. High Times Cannabis Cup. Also, the 420 rally at the Civic Center Park is going to be big. They're going to have B.O.B. and Wyclef Jean, a couple of other artists as well. At the Cannabis Cup, I just got the map for all the vending booths and such, and we're indoors with about 90, 95 indoor 10x10 booths. Outdoors at the medicating area, at least 420 booths that I could count. And then like 12 or 13 of those big mega booths, like the 40-foot size mega booths. The Magical Butter Limo will be there. They're going to be all sorts of fun. So we will bring as much of that to you as we can. I've got the new Samsung Galaxy phone, and it does help me stream live. I will try to stream live, but given how many people will be there, I don't know how much cell phone bandwidth we'll have and how well that'll turn out. But I can guarantee you we will get some great recordings, some great video to bring to you in the following week. Now, on today's show, we've got Dr. Mitch Earlywine joining us, as he does every Monday, for our Cannabis Q&A. You can call in live at 971-533-7111. If you got a question on cannabis, science, culture, history, and health for the doctor, he'll be glad to answer it. Also on today's show, there's an expose in the Washington Post about how Mexican farmers are switching from pot to opium. They can't make any money growing pot anymore because of American legalization. And of course, the DEA wants to kind of tie that to the recent heroin overdose epidemic that's been taking place in states like Vermont and cities like Portland, Oregon. But I'll show you why it's really the DEA that is to blame for the rise in heroin and Oxycodone overdose deaths. Also on the show, we're going to go behind the headlines and take a look at how the marijuana issue is beginning to become somewhat of a political landmine for candidates in the 2016 election. We're already looking ahead to 2016. Also, Bacon Dan will join us with a classic from the Police for our daily Toker Tunes for Roots Monday. But first, it all starts with the 420 radio news. We got D-Crib in Maryland. We'll tell you all about it when we come back.
We'll be right back after these messages from our 420 friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
The law offices of Omar Figueroa would like to remind you to stand up for your rights. Please do not give up your precious liberties. There's nothing wrong with standing up for our constitutional rights, and in fact, it's the best way to honor the Constitution that recognizes our natural rights. Treat law enforcement with respect and respect the Constitution by standing up for your rights. If you are detained or arrested, stand up for your rights by repeating, "I respectfully invoke all of my legal and constitutional rights. I do not consent to any search and seizure. I want to remain silent, and I want to speak with my attorney, Omar Figueroa." Omar Figueroa has more than a decade of experience in federal and California courts and graduated from Yale University, Stanford Law School, and Trial Lawyers College. Please contact the law offices of Omar Figueroa at 415-489-0420 or 707-829-0215 or on the web at omarfigueroa.com. You can get 420 Radio on the go with the Ustream video app for Android and iPhone. Go to rad-r.us/420Ustream or just click the Ustream app icon for Android or iPhone below the live radio feed at 420radio.org. Cannabis Outreach Collective is an alternative health and wellness option located in Gladstone, Oregon, that serves patients in the Portland area and beyond. We are a full-service alternative health and wellness collective accommodating patients with natural, organic, holistic, and homeopathic remedies, nutritional guidance, advice, education, and medical cannabis, fully in accordance with Oregon OMMP law. You can find out more about Cannabis Outreach Collective on Facebook at COC503 or by emailing cannabisoutreachcollective503@gmail.com or by telephone at 503-853-1319. Check out our menu on Weed Maps and visit Cannabis Outreach Collective today.
This is your 420 Radio News for Monday, April 7th, 2014. I'm Russ Belville. Maryland's House of Delegates has brought decriminalization back from the dead. We told you on Friday how a House committee had effectively killed the bill, but on Saturday, delegates from the Black Caucus issued a rare challenge to the committee to bring the bill to the floor, where it passed. The ACLU and the Black Caucus were moved to act by the disproportionate arrests of blacks for low-level marijuana offenses, rejecting the House committee's call for a 2-year study instead. Now, the Senate has agreed to the House changes to the bill, which include escalating fines of $250 and $500 for second and third offenses, where the Senate had approved just a flat $100 fine. The House also proposes mandatory drug treatment for anyone under 21 and any adult caught 3 times. Under both versions, 10 grams is the maximum amount of marijuana that is decriminalized. The bill now heads to the desk of Governor Martin O'Malley, and he is expected to sign it. Colorado governor scales back pot tax prediction from the Denver Post. Citing uncertainty in the marijuana market, Colorado's governor has ratcheted back his projection on how much tax the newly legal drug could produce. Hickenlooper said in February that medical and recreational pot taxes and fees would produce some $134 million for the fiscal year beginning in July. But Hickenlooper has pared back those expectations by more than $20 million, citing uncertainty in the market. Colorado made about $3.5 million from medical and recreational pot taxes and fees in January. Analysts expect that number to rise dramatically as new stores open and a one-time tax waiver on marijuana plants expires. However, legislative forecasters predicted last month that recreational pot would produce about $65 million in taxes next year, less than half of the governor's recreational forecast of $125 million. Colorado bill would expose pot users to child abuse charges from the Daily Caller. Parents are worried they will be charged with child abuse simply for keeping marijuana in their homes under a Colorado bill that seeks to define a drug-endangered child. Criminal charges can be filed if pot is used, grown, or merely possessed in a home where children live, and if authorities determine the drugs threaten the health and welfare of the kids. Such a threat can come from a parent or guardian who is stoned, or if the drugs are accessible to children, according to the wording of the bill. Part of the intent of the bill is to give child welfare officials and law enforcement the ability to regulate the manufacture of THC into concentrate, which is extracted using bottled butane. It can be dangerous. It can be a dangerous process that has resulted in several high-profile accidents in which the butane ignites, blowing up houses and causing severe burns. Missouri legislative leaders support limited medical marijuana from CBS St. Louis. Legislation is advancing in the Missouri House, backed by a Republican House Speaker, the Republican Majority Leader, and some Democratic leaders. The medical marijuana bill is also supported by a Republican senator from St. Louis County whose son has epilepsy. About a dozen states have considered legislation to allow use of cannabidiol oil for patients who have seizures. Cannabidiol, also called CBD, is a compound in cannabis but does not make a user high. During the past week, the South Carolina House approved a bill, and Wisconsin lawmakers have sent a measure to their governor. Alabama Governor Robert Bentley has signed legislation allowing the University of Alabama at Birmingham to study the marijuana extract. Missouri's legislation would allow the use of hemp extract with no more than 0.3% THC and at least 5% CBD. Patients or their parents would need a registration card and a prescription from a neurologist. In Missouri, the hemp oil could only be used to treat epilepsy. There is no word on where the parents or patients would get the hemp oil. Pros and cons of an Ohio constitutional amendment debated from Vindy.com. The Ohio Rights Group has collected about 15% of the 385,000 signatures it needs by July 2nd to put the Ohio Cannabis Rights Amendment to the Ohio Constitution on the November ballot. The group's president, John Pardee of Amherst, said the army of people wanting the medical marijuana amendment to pass is growing day by day. Pardee said that, ironically, it may be the reason why State Representative Robert F. Hagan of Youngstown, a longtime proponent of legalizing medical marijuana, has pulled his support for the amendment. Pardee said he thinks Hagan is looking at legislative options to medical marijuana instead of a constitutional amendment because the Ohio Rights Group has started making so much noise with its legalization message that people across the state are starting to pay attention. This has been your 420 Radio News for Monday, April 7th, 2014. I'm Russ Belville. Transcripts of 420 Radio News are available at our website at 420radio.org. When we come back, we'll go behind the headlines and take a look at a Wall Street Journal expose on the marijuana debate and the political campaigns for 2016. You're listening to The Russ Belville Show on 420radio.org. We'll be right back.
When you are starting up a medical cannabis business, you don't just want any attorney. You want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers. The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Lauren Vasquez knows the details of California marijuana law from both a personal and professional angle. Lauren Vasquez rose from the ranks of college normal activists to become one of the Bay Area's best marijuana lawyers. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer, or email fireduplawyer@gmail.com. The number again is 855-MMJ-LAWS, 855-665-5297 for your fired-up lawyer, Lauren Vasquez. Lauren Vasquez is an activist attorney you can trust. Call today.
Marijuana, do you wanna? Mary, do you wanna tonight?
As marijuana goes mainstream, you need to be armed with the facts. Nobody can teach you better than Dr. Mitch Earlywine, Ph.D. You may know Dr. Mitch from his column in High Times magazine or his weekly appearance on The Russ Belville Show. Dr. Mitch is also the author of some of the best books on marijuana science, culture, history, and health, including Understanding Marijuana, Parents' Guide to Marijuana, Pot Politics, and more. Visit Amazon.com and search for Mitch Earlywine, that's EARLEYWINE, and order your books today. You can also contact Dr. Mitch by email at 420research@gmail.com.
Fun. Big Daddy thinks. Oh yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. Time for us to go behind the headlines. And for today's behind the headlines, we're taking a look at a story that's in the Wall Street Journal. And it's about the 2016 electoral possibilities and how marijuana is beginning to be an issue that's kind of uncomfortable for a lot of these front runners. We take a look at some of the GOP and Democratic governors, for instance, and we find that Democratic governors like Martin O'Malley in Maryland are very reluctant to get involved in any support for the marijuana issue. He's kind of set his sights as being the tough on crime former mayor of Baltimore. But then you got someone like Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, a Republican, who says he's more open to liberalizing marijuana laws, decriminalization and such, and harm reduction. So it's a weird situation where a Texas Republican is better on the marijuana issue than a Maryland Democrat. And as these politicians are trying to build their case for 2016, if they have any thoughts of running for president in 2016, the marijuana issue now looms larger than it has ever loomed before. I mean, it was a question for Bill Clinton in 92, and it was something that Obama had to address in 2008. But now that we have two states that have actually legalized, and by the time the 2016 election comes around, Alaska and Oregon will probably be legalized as well. So we'll have 4 legal states in the west of America. We've already got 20 medical marijuana states. We've got 3 states now that have passed CBD only legislation, another 4 that are in the process of passing CBD only. We've got Florida that's going to pass whole plant medical marijuana constitutional amendment in 2014. So by the time we hit the 2016 election, more than half of the United States will have some medical recognition of some parts of marijuana at least, and 4 states will have outright legalized. They cannot avoid this issue any longer. So when we look at some of the stats here, this is a really interesting chart that they've got at the Wall Street Journal, and you can catch it on my Twitter feed at Radical Russ. But it shows what the support and opposition is to marijuana legalization. And the question was, what would you do if a law passed in your state that allowed adults to purchase small amounts of marijuana? Would you actively support it or favor it? And that came out to about 58% of Americans, versus those who would actively work to overturn a law was less than 20%, with another 20 or so percent that would oppose such a law but would not try to overturn it. And we also saw the poll that came out from Pew Research Center saying 75% of Americans feel that nationwide marijuana legalization is an inevitability. So we are starting to see some of these politicians come around. GOP Senator Rand Paul says it's wrong to jail pot smokers. GOP Governor Bobby Jindal of Louisiana says he's open to supervised medical use. And we've got so many others. Who's that? Ted Cruz, the Republican from Texas, has criticized President Obama for not arresting pot smokers under federal law, although very few pot smokers were ever arrested under federal law, if you don't count Don DeZarn, N.A. Poe, and Chris Goldstein. Let's see. Chris Christie, of course, the Republican who's considered, a presidential hopeful and somewhat of a disappearing sort of moderate in the Republican Party, has said outright that he does not favor legalization, does not favor recreational use, does not favor decriminalization, and does not favor the use of marijuana as medicine. That is outright completely against it. We've seen a a great deal of change in this issue. And if we look at the Democratic side, I think that's where we'll have to see the most of it. I don't think the marijuana issue is going to get you much traction as a Republican fighting through the primaries. But for the Democrats, and who the front runner right now has to be former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, she's been sketchy on the marijuana issue. During the 2008 Democratic primary, she said, "I don't think we should decriminalize, but we ought to do research into what, if any, medical benefits it has." Well, Mrs. Clinton, that was 2008. It's 2014. It will be 2016. The evidence is in. The people believe it. Medical marijuana is real. You better get in front of this issue. It's time for these politicians to start recognizing what the growing majority of America believes, and that is government has no business policing adult use of marijuana. Period. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
Have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. If he said he swam to China, he would sell you South Carolina. Then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
I'm Sub Cool from Team Green Avenger. At TGAgenetics.com, we are working on the leading edge of medical strains. Our strains are rigorously tested for THC, CBD, THCV, and other critical cannabinoids. Know your grow. Check out our genetic diversity at TGAgenetics.com, the home of Jelly Bean, Jack the Ripper, Vortex, and other award-winning cannabis strains.
Support the Russ Belville Show. Text the word Russ to 420-420 and connect with the National Cannabis Coalition. You can also send $10 to the Russ Belville Show right from your smartphone. That's Russ to 420-420.
In the afternoon, if I'm home, I smoke marijuana.
You're listening to Radical Russ on the Russ Belville Show.
Oh, marijuana. Yeah, yeah. Oh, I got my...
Everyone knows music and marijuana go together, so let's wind up our 20 after break with the Russ Belville Show's Daily Toker Tunes, the best in pod-safe 420 music from around the web. Today is Roots Monday, featuring the blues, country, folk, and jazz music that birthed the modern sounds we enjoy today. Now, sit back and enjoy your Daily Toker Tunes.
Welcome back, everyone. 23 after the hour. Normally at this time, we would have Bacon Dan on the phone line, but he's not on the phone line today, and there may be some upheaval going on in the life of Dan. I got a cryptic post from him that said that he was, he was sacked. I'm not going to say fired. I hate that word. He was sacked from his gig as manager of the restaurant. And we don't know why yet, so we're going to go find out. But I believe he's probably out there looking for new work and getting busy. So we will hear from Bacon Dan as soon as he's able to call in. Maybe next week we'll talk to him. But for now, he's left us with a great classic track from one of my favorite albums of all time. Like, you ever one of those things where they say if you could take 10 albums with you to a tropical island or deserted island, which 10 would you take? This might be in the list. This might be one of the albums in the list. It's the Police's Synchronicity album from 1983, which of course holds a lot of personal memories for me because that was, my sophomore year in high school. And I remember my friend Scott got the Synchronicity album and I remember listening to it and just being blown away. I mean, I'd heard of the Police and kind of followed them a little bit, but I always thought songs like da-do-do-do, da-da-da-da were kind of silly. until I heard Synchronicity, and I was just blown away by the musicianship, the lyricism, just amazing. Of course, The Police, three-piece rock group that everyone knows, features Gordon Sumner on bass and lead vocals, aka Sting, and Stuart Copeland as well, and dang, I'm going to forget the third guy's name off the top of my head. I knew this would happen. Stuart Copeland, Sting, and somebody in the chat room will have to remind me. Anyway, I feel awful that I'm forgetting. So let's just get right to the music. This is The Police with Walking on the Moon.
Support the Russ Belville Show. Text the word Russ to 420-420 and connect with the National Cannabis Coalition. You can also send $10 to the Russ Belville Show right from your smartphone. That's Russ to 420-420. You're listening to Radical Russ on the Russ Belville Show.
I say, little red carpet, darling, you're much too fast. Little red carpet, you need a lover that's gonna lay.
Are you or is someone you know a marijuana smoker? Have you or is someone in your family been arrested for a marijuana violation? You need to know the truth about pot. NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, is the most comprehensive source of information regarding marijuana and its effects on health, as well as legal issues. NORML even offers a database of lawyers specializing in cannabis in your area. NORML, the nation's largest and most successful marijuana law reform organization, has spent decades gathering the knowledge and science on everything related to cannabis. NORML is the best resource to find out the truth about marijuana, connect with a lawyer in your area, or help find an end to prohibition. Information is available at norml.org, that's NORML.org, or toll free at 888-67-NORML.
Medical Marijuana Radio, starring Larry Love from Santa Fe, New Mexico, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Pacific on 420radio.org.
It's time for the Russ Belville Show's Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Dr. Earlywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and a leading author and researcher on cannabinoids and health, who pins the Ask Dr. Mitch column for High Times magazine. Get your questions ready in our live chat or call in to 971-533-7111 now.
Welcome back, everyone. 32 after the hour, and it's Monday, and that means time for us to visit with Dr. Mitch. How you doing, Dr. Mitch?
Having a great day.
Oh, having a great day here, too. It's nice and sunny. Spring has finally sprung. Really looking forward to it. Let me remind the audience that you can get your live questions in here for Dr. Mitch Earlywine by dialing the number you see on the screen, 971-533-7111, or you can join our chat room on ustream.tv and ask your questions there. Just let us know. And we always start this segment by giving Dr. Mitch the first word to let us know what is the latest in cannabis science.
A new article came out in the Journal of General Internal Medicine and basically showing that there's no detectable association between frequency of marijuana use and healthcare utilization. And it's always hard to get these null results published, but this is a really cool study with over 500 participants, and literally 84% of them had used cannabis either daily or less than daily. And basically it walked through emergency department use, all kinds of healthcare utilization, hospitalization, things like that, that a lot of prohibitionists have been claiming we're going to spike if we, let marijuana actually, God forbid, be legal. And in fact, they found absolutely no increases among the cannabis users for all these different forms of healthcare utilization, just reassuring us that, in fact, regular cannabis use doesn't have to have negative health consequences and isn't going to cost taxpayers or insurance companies extra money.
It seems like we're getting a few of these studies come out recently that show there's not much difference between cannabis consumers and the general public. I think the one we talked about a couple weeks ago was the impact on crime, and they found legalizing or decriminalizing or medical marijuana, none of that had much effect on whether whether there'd be more crime, for that matter. I'm wondering now, what can we say about marijuana users that is statistically different from the general populace?
Well, they tend to be a little more extroverted, a little more sensation-seeking, and they definitely like Twinkies.
They like Twinkies more. Well, there you go. Now, another story that came up, and this one is featured in the Washington Post today, And it has to do a lot with the rising heroin epidemic, and a lot of places that hadn't previously seen, the heroin epidemic, like, the state of Vermont or a place like Oklahoma City, are dealing with these, mass increases in heroin abuse. What do you see as the cause or causes of that, and how should we respond to that?
It's been a curious an association between sort of prescription opiates like Vicodin, Hydrocodone, things like that, and then these sudden spikes in heroin use. And I think what has happened in part is people are leaning so heavily on these for pain or using them as a treatment for anxiety, which is just insane. And we've already seen that having cannabis available decreases people's need for these as far as pain control is concerned. And I don't really know if it would necessarily be linked to stricter cannabis laws or a lot more cannabis busts, but it'd be nice to be able to say, hey, here's an opportunity to use an alternative substance, a natural plant, instead of these opiates. Couldn't this help you get off these? And we do have some data from Philippe Lucas and folks like that up in Canada suggesting that, in fact, people can make a lot of progress with that as far as it's concerned. And then I think in part people have this oddball notion that pharmaceutical drugs, because they're pharmaceutical drugs, are somehow magic or easy or simple or non-addictive, and then they're stuck in these situations where they can no longer get those because of the prescribing problems, and then turn to that underground heroin market. It just seems a real shame when obviously these drugs really aren't at all the best treatment for either pain or for anxiety or some of the other things that people lean on them for.
Okay, and we'll talk more about that in our next segment as well. I'm going to take a look at some of the numbers behind the rise in heroin use, Oxycodone use, and so forth. Another issue now that's got people concerned, I covered a story this morning on a proposed bill in Colorado that would add a definition of a drug-endangered child. And they say the purpose behind the bill is, we have these explosions, people making butane hash oil in the house, they blow it up, they endanger their kids, and they want to have some sort of tool to be able to prosecute people that might be endangering their children in that way. But a lot of medical marijuana patients and just regular cannabis consumers are afraid this could be used to, trump up charges against parents just because they happen to be cannabis smokers. How do you think we should deal with this legislatively to try to address, people being irresponsible with their drug use around their children without going too far into the privacy and just the general adult use, the responsible adult use? How do you draw that legislative line?
I think the clincher here is understanding how safety really works. Obviously, possession of a plant isn't going to endanger a child. We know that. What about a grow room? Well, is it properly set up, or is it electrically dangerous? It's possible, but extremely unlikely. And most folks who grow their own are really aficionados and take a lot of pride in doing it right and doing a good job. As soon as you start working with butane, the level of safety required in order to make sure you're working with it properly is a different level. I would certainly support the idea that people who do this may need to do it in a setting where there aren't kids around, or that they've got essentially a sufficient training in order to do these kinds of things in a way that they know is safe. If you're going to open up a restaurant, you go get approval from health commission and things like that. You take courses and you know how to basically deal with food in a way that's safe. Why couldn't we do something comparable with the making of hash oil at home?
Yeah, this seems to me like also sometimes we focus, or lawmakers, I should say, are focusing on the worst case scenarios of marijuana users and then never consider how that could also apply to just lots of situations. I mean, if we're worried about someone setting up a grow site that might have, pesticides, chemicals, electrical hazards, whatever, do we also have that same worry about the guy setting up his home brew kit? And would there be anything there a kid might get into? I would think that we could make laws that address dangerous situations, and they don't have to be cannabis specific. I mean, if you're working with any sort of explosive gas in the home, that's probably a danger to kids.
Oh, in fact, you and I grew up in places where folks had drill presses in the basement and firearms and things like that. And again, it's a matter of knowing how to use these tools. and making sure you use them in a safe way.
Well, don't even get me started on legislators that want to restrict grow sites at home because of the danger to children, yet support bringing guns into churches and bars and hospitals. I mean, I already get enough emails as it is. Let's go to one of the questions from our chat room here, from John Thomas, who says, about 750,000 Americans are arrested for simple marijuana possession every year. How many of those arrests result in convictions and criminal records?
That's intriguing. I don't have those data right here in front of me. The last time I saw something like this, it was over a decade ago, and it was 88%. But it's not something I'd want to generalize to the current year. Invariably, what happens is varied across individual states. And I hate to say it, but if your skin is darker than mine or your Spanish is better, odds are high you're going to get convicted. If you happen to be Caucasian and have more money, you can often plead down to something else or simply end up getting fined. So it's unfortunately varied not only across location, but also ethnicity.
Another thing that we often mention, and maybe we ought to make this as a quick little correction, we throw around the phrase, 750,000 people were arrested for marijuana, but maybe some of those people were arrested twice in a year. Doesn't that number really reflect arrests? And is there any number that tells us how many actual people got arrested?
So we don't have that statistic, and there are duplicates within a year. So it's not necessarily 750,000 individuals. It's just 750,000 individual arrests.
Okay. And fewer and fewer of those because Washington and Colorado aren't doing it anymore, and Maryland's decriminalizing. So we're bound to see some of those numbers go down over time. All right, I want to get back to the big story that's been happening over this first week of April, and that is the death of the 19-year-old man who fell off a balcony. Now, I'm reading some reports that say he jumped off the balcony after eating the marijuana cookies. Is there anything about marijuana, and even if you're overdosing on it and you're a newbie, that is going to lead you to that sort of, more LSD-like horror story of wanting to fly or something like that?
In fact, when we look at the base rate of how often people just fall off ladders and the base rate of use of medical cannabis now, we would expect one of these to happen just by chance. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. We don't have, even at high doses, the kind of thought disorder, if you will, that's often associated with the hallucinogens. And in fact, a lot of those old hallucinogen stories were yellow journalism, were basically hyperbolic explanations that then found their way onto sitcoms and various soap operas and things like that back in the 70s. You don't actually ever meet the guy who had that happen, right? You never meet the guy who thought he could fly and then jumped off a house. You always hear about the friend of a friend of a friend. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if, in fact, even under hallucinogens, this has never really happened, and we just sort of had this join that cultural lore.
Yeah. One of in our chat room, people are saying, gosh, I get more risk averse when I'm high. I want to take less risk. Is there any evidence to that?
Well, in fact, when Roby was doing the first driving studies back in '98, and he would tell people, okay, now you've smoked the marijuana, you're going to go drive now, they'd say, you mean outside? I mean, they really thought that was, not a good idea and didn't really want to go. And it's pretty common for folks to, really appreciate that pizza is delivered.
Yeah. All right. We have time for one more question. But before we go, I want to remind everyone, if you want to get your questions in direct to Dr. Mitch, you can do that through email. Just send it to 420research@gmail.com, 420research@gmail.com. And I'm going to get you my last question here it's this story, one of the LA Times story on the kid who jumped off fell off the balcony. At the very end of the story, they're talking with Dr. Scott Bentz, who's a medical director of emergency services at a Denver hospital. And he says, quote, all of the old studies and textbooks and toxicology are based on the effects of inhaled marijuana. The edibles are uncharted territory for those of us in emergency medicine. Is that true? Is there not as much understanding of what ingested marijuana is going to do to people medically?
I mean, the clincher is that because it's ingested orally, there's that 11-hydroxy-THC made by the liver that crosses that blood-brain barrier more rapidly, which is why they last longer and can be more efficient than inhaled vapor. But we don't have as many studies on this, and in part it's been the co-opted issue with only being able to get cannabis from the University of Mississippi, with the DEA making us jump through incredible hoops in order to get cannabis for research in the first place. And I hate to say it, but it's a product of prohibition that we don't know more about this. And then when you do find these studies, it's curious, like there'll be 5 authors on the study and 5 participants, so they happen to be able to make brownies, and it sounds like they're making them for themselves and doing the best study they can.
Yeah, and physiologically, though, there is a difference, though, where the enzymes turn the THCA into a different molecule. Is that correct?
Well, and then that's something that also basically means, smoking a gram versus eating a gram are really not equivalent. It takes a lot longer time to hit when you notice effects in the first place, and that peak and duration can be higher under those circumstances. It really much more dependent on state of the gut, too, whereas smoking, if you've just eaten, can be just as efficient as ever. If you've just eaten and then eat a brownie, it's obviously going to take a lot longer to kick in.
Still a lot to learn here as far as the edibles go, and they're becoming more and more popular. The pot shops in Denver say it accounts for about 40% of their sales, so we'll keep an eye on that stuff. Dr. Mitch joins us every Monday here for our Cannabis Q&A. Thank you so much, Dr. Mitch. We'll talk to you next week.
Always great hearing from you, and I'll talk to you next week.
When we come back, we're going to rant a little bit on that heroin epidemic and Mexican farmers switching to opium production. It's in the Washington Post. I'm going to break it down with some statistics when we come back.
It's simply business, you know why they won't let us grow. It's simply business.
We'll be right back after these messages from our 420 friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
It's simply business. It's simply business. It's simply business, you know why they won't let us grow. It's simply business. It's simply business, you know why they won't let us grow. It's simply business.
Marijuana and alcohol are the 2 most popular recreational drugs in America. Marijuana smoking is non-toxic, relatively safe, and has a low risk of dependence. Alcohol drinking is potentially fatal, dangerous to society, and is quite addictive. Marijuana is safer, so why are we driving people to drink? That's the question of the new book, Marijuana is Safer, So Why Are We Driving People to Drink? By Paul Armentano, Mason Tvert, and Steve Fox. Visit Amazon.com or ChelseaGreen.com today to order your copy of Marijuana is Safer, or visit MarijuanaIsSafer.com.
420 Radio is 24-hour marijuana.
Oh, hey everybody, it's me, Mr. Bill. Hey! And you know, when you're in the entertainment business, you have to be traveling coast to coast all the time.
Say, Mr. Bill, you've got a long trip ahead of you. You'll need something to help keep you awake.
Well, I've been really trying to cut down on my coffee lately.
Then how about some drugs?
Oh, no, drugs are bad, and you kids out there should never, ever use them.
Oh, come on, try some. So remember, kids, say,
oh, no!
To drugs.
You want to legalize it? Call your congressman today. 202-224-3121. It's free, it's easy, and you don't even have to give your name, just your zip code, and they'll hook you up to your congressman. Call 202-224-3121 and tell Congress you support marijuana legalization.
Liberate your mind. Liberate your mind. what you got to do. Liberate.
You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical rant.
Blame the DEA and Oxycodone manufacturers, not marijuana, for rising heroin overdose deaths. You know, the Washington Post has printed a grim expose on the shift from Mexican marijuana to Mexican heroin. The Post notes that since the United States has been decriminalizing, medicalizing, and legalizing marijuana, the wholesale price of Mexican marijuana has dropped from $100 per kilogram to just $25 per kilogram. Quote, "It's not worth it anymore," said Rodrigo Celia, a lifelong cannabis farmer who said he couldn't remember the last time his family and others in their tiny hamlet gave up growing mota. Quote, "I wish the Americans would stop with this legalization." End quote. Now, poor Mexican farmers have started planting opium poppies where cannabis plants once grew. Cia says, quote, "There's no other way to make a living here," end quote. Since 2012, the wholesale price for Mexican opium sap has doubled from $750 per kilogram to about $1,500 per kilogram. Last year, American authorities confiscated 2,162 kilograms of heroin on the Mexican border. That was a record and an increase of over 20% from the previous year. And as cities as diverse as my own Portland, Oregon, and Oklahoma City and Brattleboro, Vermont, deal with unprecedented levels of heroin addiction, the administration has taken notice. Attorney General Eric Holder called the 79% rise in heroin use from 2007 through 2012, quote, "an urgent and growing health crisis," end quote. And the DEA has claimed that heroin is, quote, "moving all over the country and popping up in areas you didn't see before," end quote. Now, naturally, the drug warriors would like to blame that supposed gateway drug, marijuana. But even as the Washington Post explains, quote, "prescription painkillers remain more widely abused and account for far more fatal overdoses," end quote. But the DEA, they are trying to paint a picture of shrewd Mexican cartels reacting to their cut in marijuana business by sowing more heroin addicts. The DEA even claims cartels send their heroin pushers to work in the cities that have the worst prescription pill epidemics and have them, quote, "set up right outside the methadone clinics," end quote. But there's one big factor left out of this story. One that makes it far easier for the DEA to infer that legalizing marijuana has led to more heroin overdoses. And that's the fact that it was the DEA itself, not Mexican cartels, who created the addicted customers for those cartels to service. Back in 2011, a reporter named Guy Taylor was writing for Alternet, and he uncovered startling revelations about the DEA and how it regulates powerful prescription opioids like Oxycontin. Any Schedule II drug like Oxycontin must go to a little-known DEA agency called the Office of Diversion Control. Gene Haslip was a former head of that office for 17 years, and he told Taylor that his office could have done more to prevent the prescription pill epidemic by reducing the quotas drug manufacturers are limited to. That's right, Oxycontin, unlike marijuana, is a synthetic, and it requires labs and precursor chemicals and well-trained manufacturers. You can't reasonably make your own, so it can be controlled. Much like the DEA ended the heyday of methylqualone, otherwise known as Quaaludes, by restricting their pharmacy manufacture. They went to the few places that made methylqualone, they set up strict quotas on it, and when was the last time you ever saw a Quaalude? Now, in 1997, just to give you an idea of these quotas that are allowed, Purdue Pharma, which was the first drug company that was allowed to make a patent version of Oxycodone, and they called it Oxycodone, the prescription drug. In 1997, Purdue Pharma was allowed to make 8,300 kilograms of oxycodone. Or Oxycontin, I should say. 8,300 kilograms of Oxycontin. Now, I have a chart here to show you, because at the Office of DEA Diversion Control, Office of National Diversion Control there for the DEA, they actually have a PDF that shows you from 2004 through 2014 what the quotas are allowed for various scheduled drugs. It even includes marijuana. It includes cannabinoids, because they got to manufacture, the synthetic THC for Marinol and all those things. Well, here's the chart. From 2004 to 2014, in light blue, we've got hydrocodone. That's like Vicodin. And then in dark blue, we've got oxycodone. That's your OxyContin. So in 2004, manufacturers were allowed to make just shy of 50,000 kilograms. That's right. 97, 8,300 kilograms. And then 7 years later, 50,000 kilograms. That was an increase of about, I'm sorry, I don't know what that increase was. That was it 5 times increase, 6 times increase that we're talking about? This year, the quota is triple the 2004 quota, just shy of 150,000 kilograms of Oxycontin. That's an increase of about 18 times over the 8,300 kilograms that were allowed in 1997. We've gone from 8,300 kilograms in 97 to 150,000 kilograms today. Now, why would the DEA allow there to be triple the amount of Oxycontin made over a decade when that same decade was marred by prescription drug abuse? Well, going back to the Alternet article, former diversion control head Haslip said, quote, "For a DEA official to put his or her neck on the line to block a company's requested quota increase takes an awful lot of guts and a lot of hard work, particularly if that company is supporting members of Congress who have the power to block the agency's funding." End quote. In other words, when Big Pharma asks to make more Oxycontin, the DEA generally lets them. But they don't want to make it look that way. So Gary Boggs, this guy Gary Boggs, he was a DEA supervisory special agent. He was interviewed by Taylor for the Alternet piece, and he explained that the increased quotas have nothing to do with collusion between drug manufacturers and the DEA. Instead, the reason for the increase was even more shocking. This is Boggs, quote, "What you have to understand is that you do have legitimate patients, and they're fishing from the same pond that the illegitimate patients are fishing from. So you have to be cautious not to restrict the quota to the point that when the legitimate parties go to the pool, all the fish haven't been taken out by all the illegitimate parties." End quote. In other words, we have to make enough oxy for the recreational users so there'll be enough left for the medical users. Too bad that excuse didn't work for Eddie Lepp's medical marijuana garden. So now, the Oxycontin continues to be manufactured in record numbers, but the DEA, reacting to the surge in prescription painkiller abuse, is cracking down harder on the non-prescription use of it. As the DEA cracks down on the prescription painkiller abuse, the price of an oxycodone tablet on the streets has risen to $80. For that kind of money, an opiate user can buy 20 hits of $4 Mexican heroin that is far more powerful and pure. Meanwhile, the FDA just approved a new synthetic opiate pill called Zohydro. It has 5 times the hydrocodone available in a Vicodin without any of Vicodin's added acetaminophen. Unlike a Vicodin and unlike the recently reformulated Oxycontin, it has no additives to prevent it from being crushed and snorted or boiled and injected. The governors of Massachusetts and Vermont, hit hard by the heroin epidemic, have issued emergency orders to halt its sale. 28 states' attorneys general signed a letter asking the FDA to withdraw Zohydro or at least make it non-snortable and non-injectable. Legislation in both the U.S. Senate and House has been introduced to force the FDA to withdraw Zohydro. Unbelievable. And they want to blame pot. Folks, marijuana is the exit drug from opiate addiction. We need more of it, not less. All All right, folks, that's all the time we got for today. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back with Hour 2 here in just a second. But for Hour 1, for Brian the Red, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant